Hello, and welcome to the Weshtern Philosophy Podcast. Two friends with oceans and notions discussing the unseen forces in our lives through the lens of music, mystery, and crack. This week, we welcome artist Jane Carkill onto the pod to discuss the fascinating topic of failure.
That takes probably years and years of refining to understand actually what is success to you once you make past the stage of making money. That's when you kind of start to play with the concept of what's my identity. For me, it's actually the not so much the finished product. It's again the in between. It's the act of making it for me, which is the most important part. I think we kind of talked about the nothingness place, the thin place as we call it, and for me that's actually the act of creating. It's almost like this thin veil when I'm making something. It's like a vacuum bubble where nothing exists outside of me and the desk.
Meow, 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 meow. Meow, meow. I am also a musician.
Are we recording?
We are.
We might be. I had a sneaky suspicion that we might be.
Yeah, we are.
Right.
I think we just start. It's
frantic,
normally
guys.
we sit down and take a few notes, Jane, but I think that train has sailed. Bart is meowing.
This is all par for the course.
It's not strong note-taking energy. So
No.
instead of sitting around taking notes, we will say welcome to Jane Cargill, artist.
Carkill.
Right. Start again. The funny thing is, actually, I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, great! He's going to say your surname because I'm not sure if I'm going to hit the K or not." And he fucked up.
Yeah, I did.
Right.
And I know it's Cargill. Of course it's Cargill.
Well,
but
I don't think
it was-
that's still not right. Can you say it?
Carkill.
Yeah.
Oh, Cargill. I thought I said Cargill.
No, you said Cargill.
That happens a lot. It's
Yeah,
like you
Carkill.
can see like all the letters that come in through the door. It's like Carkill, McCarkill.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is though, we've kind of tried to trace the surname back, and it seems that like it's just a small collective existing in Collooneen, and we can't find anything else apart from that. So we think it comes from McCarkill, which is like Scottish,
Right.
but can't find any trace of it. So people always go, "Oh, that's an unusual surname," but it's very like guttural. I don't really know. I like the way it sounds. Carkill.
Yeah.
Carkill.
Yeah.
Carkill.
Cargill, yeah. Sounds like you were you might have left Scotland in a bit of a hurry.
But the thing is, I did those heritage DNA tests because me and my sister were really curious. We always get comments saying, "Oh, you don't look Irish." So we were like, "What is our heritage?" And then it came back 100% Irish. I was like, "That's impossible."
You're so Irish
That's
that
impossible.
you don't look Irish anymore. Yeah.
It's like we're just so inbred that like it's just surpassed.
Jesus Christ, that's not what we meant at all.
You're what an Irish person is meant to look like. The rest of us are diluted.
So I was like, "Oh, surely it's kind of the gene pool that of the people that submit to that DNA thing is all that they go." That's me pleading. I'm like, please, that can't be the answer. So yeah, that's it so far. It's an anomaly.
I wonder when it is Irish though. Like, I mean, 100% Irish. Like, what does that even mean? Does that mean from the year 500 or something? Because
Yeah,
I mean,
like-
Ireland has had a lot of changes, hasn't it? Like, I
It's
was
got the
watching.
Celts and the Normans and the...
Well, I was watching that documentary about the Burn where they found out, or they think based on the DNA, that it was like black people with blue eyes
Oh,
who lived
yeah.
in the Burn. And so I wonder, yeah. But 100%.
The thing was, I was like, again, trying to go off of some speck of hope. I was like, oh, like surely that's false. That couldn't be true. They like pinpointed North Clare, like right to the dot. I was like, there's no escaping it. But like I was like, my mom is from the other side of the county, so that dilutes the gene pool a little bit. So like my dad was able to look slightly over the garden wall. So
Okay, we're back.
hello,
Yep.
it's working.
Hello, we're back, and that first bit is gone.
No, we have it. I just we lost a little glitchy bit there. What were we talking about?
We were talking about you mispronouncing Jane's surname,
And then we got into genetics.
and then we got into genetics. Well, the thing I was going to say is one of the things I really like around here is how super local things are. And I might have told the story before, but I was walking with my friend Fiona up by Inchiquin Lake, you know, by Clifton. You can go up
Yes.
that hill; it's a beautiful walk. And we met an old farmer who was 87. I think Bakey was his surname, but anyway, he had like a perfect fire engine red Massey Ferguson from like eons ago. And he was like, "Oh, are you guys on holiday?" I was like, "Well, no, I actually live in Kilnaboy, but I'm originally Dutch, and Fiona is originally from Wicklow, I think, but now living in Estymon." So we were like, so we're, a bit apologetic. We're like, we're blowing. So he's like, "Well, I was born in Corofin, so I'm a bit of a blow-in myself." And I thought that was
It is like that.
hilarious.
Do you remember I mentioned I think the first podcast you ever had where you said, Anthony, it's like quite a journey to get from even Kerry to Clare. And it really is. It's so like even when we mentioned there like Scariff, like that seems like a different country to me. It's like North Clare versus like the East Clare. It's like two different worlds. Like it really is, even just within the same county in itself, which is, it's always been like that. But do you remember how I had said as well, growing up here all my life, the landscape and everything, even the discourse of what people think about North Clare is so different to when I was even a teenager, even 10 years ago. It's become super cool from people like you, so thank you.
Oh yeah, that's, we're just here doing God's work, elevating the cool factor of.
But that was
North
funny
Clare.
when we met you for our little pre-interview, and we were like, "So Jane, why did you come here?" And you were like, "You fuckers, I've always been here. You bunch of fucking blow-ins have just arrived because it's suddenly cool now. I was here before it was cool." Yeah. You didn't give it that much attitude. Now, to be fair, you were quite nice about it. But that was the subtext.
Yeah, it is. It's funny because even like I always notice it at the St. Patrick's Day parade, because that's where kind of everybody local seems to come out. And I don't recognize anybody anymore. It's where there might be like one or two people, they might recognize me, but it's a whole different families and stuff that I feel it's almost where I feel like an outsider now. I have to make the effort to know people. I think that there's a community and people that are blow-ins can kind of attach to each other and have a familiarity in that they don't know what they're doing, so let's come together. Whereas when you've been here, you kind of feel like, oh, am I allowed in, So
and you might feel like you don't need to work so much. Like I definitely feel it in Kerry when I go back there. It's like, because you have your family and your school friends and stuff like that. But when you move to a new place, you need to work a bit harder to make a community. And then you get all these expats supporting each other, blow-ins, expats. Expat's a horrible phrase.
Well, I qualify as both. How do you feel about it, actually?
I feel it's interesting because all of the people that I would have grown up with, ironically, have moved away. So it's where you have to almost reintroduce yourself to the world. And that can be really difficult, because I think even meeting you for the first time, I felt like I knew you from the podcast. And that's what I really love about the podcast, is that I felt there was such a familiarity in your personalities that I felt like I was your friends already. And I kind of forget that
lovely, Jane.
that ye had to perceive me as well. So suddenly I'm like, who am I even nice? Do people even like me? It's like when you enter like through the door and it's like, oh, you have to introduce yourself. Whereas when there was people that you've known all your life, it's almost like family. You can just be you don't even think about it. But when you introduce yourself to new people, you're like, what do I look like? What are my interests? You actually have to be intimate with yourself and ask, who am I, and do other people want to know me? So that's scary. That's really scary. So I think it's difficult meeting new friends as an adult anyway, because when you're a child, you just get like thrown into the sandpit or like pile of glass, whatever. Everyone is like super friendly already.
And you've been to release.
But as an adult, it is difficult, and especially if you're someone who's like somewhat introverted, I really am fed off of the company of people, but sometimes it can be painful for me to actually talk at all. It's like, what do I say? I don't know. What's interesting? What do people want to know?
This is a great medium.
Great. Yeah. Well, you're in the right place, Jane. Well, despite my inability to pronounce your surname, we're very happy to have you here to talk about the topic which you suggested, which I am already embodying since I've already fucked up your introduction.
Oh, no.
And then pulled out a cable, crashing the entire DAW, which is both new experiences to me. So I thought, because the topic is failure, I thought I'd get some of it in at the start, so we'd have a bit something to talk about. So
I hold you in the very highest esteem.
I thought that was going to end with contempt. But that's
and I meant it quite deeply, and it's making him uncomfortable.
Yeah. So, thank you for being here, Jane.
Jane C from Kilfenor.
Person.
Jane Carkill.
Yes.
That's kind of nice, actually, Jane Carkill from Kilfenor.
Yeah, there's like a
double kill.
Yeah, nice alliteration. So, why failure, Jane?
why have you picked that
Picked it,
subject?
yeah.
Not why why do you do it?
Well, I suppose when I talk to so I'm an artist. I don't know, do many people know that? But one of the things that I kind of, even talking with you guys, I think that one thing that's kind of a misconception about artists or musicians, it's like the mystique of the tormented genius artist that just has this like sudden spur of creativity. That's all you can see is like, we see this kind of trope of the writer typing on his typewriter uncontrollably. He's just full of ideas. Yeah. And you don't see that the period in between that is often kind of like fraught with not knowing what you're doing, spinning around in your chair, feeling like you're the worst person in the world. And the fact that you are so I know me personally, the fact that I'm so attached to my art personally, I feel like it's like a reflection of myself. The periods of making the art, making bad art, making failures at art is not spoken about, which can feel really isolating. It makes you feel like you're the only person going through it. So I think that talking about as a creative person or just failures in general should be spoken more about, so it doesn't feel so kind of catastrophic when it happens to you, because things like this podcast or talking to other people in a really intimate conversation about things they've gone through is so humanizing. It can feel like actually it's not the end of the world. So that's why I would hope, if there's anything that I can add of value today, that people will come away and think that maybe it's difficult for me to describe. I feel guilty at times when people say, oh, you're such a success and all this. I'm like, I actually don't know what I'm doing a lot of the time. So hopefully today we can talk about it and people will leave feeling it's really okay to fail a lot of the time. And it's 99% of the time is actually failing. The 1% is the good stuff.
And just keeping going. And your the main art that is your I suppose your bread and butter and your forte is illustration? It
is. So I studied textiles. So my kind of journey with college and making art is kind of fraught with failure as well, because originally I went to study English and Irish, and I did that for like a month in college. And the reason that I didn't do art initially, even though it was something that I kind of always had no question in that I was going to do anything else, it was just, I am an artist. That was my identity. It was because I suppose I had a really encouraging family, but in the school environment, I felt like I wasn't very good. And that's because there was people that were better than me. So that meant, there can only be one. There can only be one supreme. Rules. So I was kind of like, oh, well, that's the end of that then. So I really enjoy reading. I really enjoy playwriting and things like that. I never wanted to be on the stage, but I was interested in behind the scenes drama mixed with Irish. So I was like, oh, I'll study that. Big mistake. I went into, from what was a really small rural environment to suddenly massive university, thousands of people. I was like, oh, I've made a huge mistake. What will I do? I'm going to have to withstand this for 4 years, being like super unhappy. I knew like instantly the first day I made a massive mistake. It felt like I was just in this like ocean of just uncertainty, and like that feeling of like I've made a massive mistake and I'm stuck in it now. Like I have to commit to this. If I don't, then I've let down my parents, I've let down myself, and when you're really young, I think there's this huge pressure as well. When you look back, I was just a baby, you're 18 years old and that's where you're making your big life decisions. But I remember my mom and dad were so supportive. They, like, every night I would call them crying, going, I hate this, I'm so unhappy. I'm really unhappy to be away from home as well. It was probably where there's too much of a pressure to leave the nest or whatever. And they said, why don't you just pull out, work for a year making paintings, build up a portfolio and do your art, because that's what you've always meant to do. So that's what I did. I pulled out of college, which thankfully, if they weren't encouraging, I would have probably been stuck in it for years and years. So that was
big time saving.
Yeah. And money too. Yeah. So then I built a portfolio, then went into college in Limerick for my first year. That's where you kind of are taught how to think, I suppose, because you already have the skills built up a little bit, practicing in school, practicing in your own studio. And then when you go into art college, it's a different way of learning how to approach art. It's learning how to think and using art as a vehicle to express that. So you do multiple different kind of avenues. You're doing like paint and sculpture and things. But what I always wanted to do was to draw. And I felt then there was no avenue that really fit what I wanted to do for my own personal fulfillment, which was drawing, because that's often seen as just a tool but not real art in itself. So I tried animation, it didn't work out. I tried out painting, it didn't work out. Anything that would give me the vehicle to draw, which is animation or painting, is the first stage, is drawing. And I still felt like it didn't fit because it was discouraged. Drawing was discouraged all the time. So I pulled out of Limerick then in my first year, and then finished my degree in Galway doing textiles, because that was encouraged, drawing. Sorry, I'm like really rambling now, telling you my whole life story.
I'm hooked. I even just realised my mouth's slightly open as a reporter. There's cameras these days. You need to close that a little bit. No, but that's fascinating. And that's fascinating as well, that even in that there's a journey of dropping out.
Lots of failures,
dropping out. But I'm really interested as well that you're saying that, to me, kind of nearly, when you say you're an artist, nearly the first thing that pops up to me is someone who's able to draw. Like, I cannot draw for, like, Jesus, save my life. Like, nothing. Like, if you're like, it'd be stickman, you know. Actually, the only thing I ever drew that I liked was when in school they taught us how to draw a face. Oh, yeah. And they kind of actually explained, like, if you make the eyebrows kind of halfway up the head, and you take that line into the nose, and then we did that with crayons, and it was actually pretty cool. And I was like, oh, okay. But it's interesting that would be the first thing I would think of with an artist. But you're saying that actually everyone was like, no, it needs to be more. It can't just be drawn. It has to be drawn in animation. It has to be. But in textiles, funnily enough, they were, it's super handy if you can draw what you want.
Yeah, because it's a lot with textile art or design. The first part, I suppose, oh my goodness, there's so much in this world to talk about. I feel like I'll be rambling around forever.
Go on.
So the thing I suppose about contemporary art nowadays is that people go into the museum, and you know the way they see, it's quite fun actually to go into, you know, the graduate degree shows and do like almost like a bingo game. You'll usually see like a pile of soil on the floor, you know, like Barbies and Kens, and you know, this kind of certain tropes. But the thing with contemporary art is that is the Z in the alphabet. So it's like the A to Z. The A is the first idea, the Z is the final. What the most interesting part actually is what's in between, and that's the journey that the artist actually went through to get to this final concept. And I understand why people find contemporary art so polarizing, because we don't know that journey at all. And when you're in college, you get to see the journey that the artist goes on to come to this final concept, which may just be a pencil on the table or a banana stuck to the wall, but it makes sense. But that's why people find, it's a load of shite, excuse me, the S word.
We've kicked the explicit tab on Acast. Go nuts. We're
like, Jane is coming in. Better get it ready, guys. We're not going to bleep this out. Too much work, like.
You have like a keyboard, like rough, like helicopter.
No, please swear away.
Sorry.
I remember people were saying back in the day when photography got more accessible, photorealistic paintings suddenly lost their value to an extent, because that was considered to be a very high form of visual art, to be able to be photorealistic. And now you just had a machine that could do it. So art was encouraged to evolve to do things a camera couldn't do. So that kind of photorealistic stage was maybe not valued as highly for a while. It was like, we need to look beyond it. But I think that's coming back around again.
It's funny because I suppose like back in before the times of somewhat contemporary thinking, like in the late 1800s, art would have been often used for portraying religious messages. So they tried to make them not so much super realistic, but, you know, portraying stories from the Bible, things that the human eye couldn't really perceive in real life. So you have like, you know, the angels or the depths of hell and things like that. So even things with objects, the fact that in Catholicism especially, it would have been really discouraged to worship objects and things like that. They would still utilize the art as kind of more so showing the wonders of God's nature. The same with like drawing, it would have been like utilizing your skills to show how amazing God could create such a talent in a human. And the same thing where, you know, the way you see the really old style of art where it's like very flat and it doesn't look very human, like the hieroglyphics, you know, people often go like, I can't walk like an Egyptian. It's like, we're not meant to, because it's where they would have drawn it from a god's eye. They're picking out the best arm, the best leg angle, and kind of compiling this human from a god's eye. The same thing with art, where it would have been utilizing art and your skills to show the wonders of God's greatness. And then when they would have started to shun these kind of ideas of only using art for pious reasons, then they started to kind of look more so at nature and how insignificant we are in comparison to nature. How can I portray this big scale, the colors and things like that? So things started to become really modernized. The invention of the camera as well. When we start to turn away from religious imagery and more so exploring what humans can do as an entity away from God, that's when contemporary thinking started to come in, and just as an act of rebellion as well against the church. So maybe there is an act of turning back towards tradition, not in the religious sense, but I think the fact with AI and stuff, there's more of a value in what the human hand can do. So I know that for myself, I've always had a real value in traditional things that aren't digital, like working on paper and things like that, working with pencil. But then I also feel like there's no value in my art sometimes because I can become almost obsessive with perfectionism and find such a beautiful primal quality in something that you would draw, Bart, because there's something, I think, childlike about it. And the way when you find children make art, there's no veil about what's right and wrong. It's like they just say, why not? Let me just try it. Let me just put. So, when you see children draw portraits and things like that, they are just drawing what is true to them. So usually it's like the purest form in a portrait. Whereas if I try to draw somebody, I maybe try to draw them in a beautiful light, but something that you would draw because maybe you don't have the perfectionist skill. It just is true to your heart and you're not trying to curate it in a certain way. So I often wonder, is there any value in my art at all? Because I often worry that I can do what a camera can do and I don't have that like primal pure quality that you have.
That's amazing that nearly your proficiency precludes
that there's no point to it
of your work.
Yeah, it's like, what's the point if Anthony can take a photo of what I'm drawing and just replicate it? What's the point of me drawing it? Whereas if you draw it, it's pure and true. It's primal and it's very honest. Whereas I do absolutely think that there's an honesty to my work, but the fact that it's so perfect, I suppose, I'm like, is there a point to it? I wonder and worry about that. I'm like, have I failed as an artist? Because there's no point to it at all.
It's amazing that you started talking about failure as in that you weren't actually taking the journey, because you were dropping out of university and stuff, so you were failing in that sense, but actually getting closer to the medium that you liked, and now you've gotten
it's like
more
come
successful, and you're more successful and very proficient in that, because I think Anthony and I both think your work is absolutely beautiful.
Oh, thanks, guys.
It's we'll get on to that later, because I actually wrote, uniquely for me, written some things down. But it's interesting that now your proficiency, it's nearly as if you're always going to be coming back to failure no matter what. And
I think that's the thing. It's where contentment is often the enemy of progress. Because you're kind of, I think that in your life as well, I will often fall into the trap where I might apply for jobs that I know I'm really proficient at. I know that I won't fail at them because then I won't feel the sting of my own failure, which is so painful. So it's like, if I just do things at a base level of being just okay at them all the time, then the road is really, really smooth all the time. And it's kind of numbing. But that's really nice to live that way sometimes. It's very safe, which Katie knows probably as a Taurus, I love safety. So the same thing with my art, maybe it's where sometimes I'll do things that work for me. And then inherently I won't feel the amazing highs that come with a bumpy road, but then you don't feel the lows too.
Well, what I love about your story, Jane, is that there's another way of phrasing it, which would be more of an artist statement. Coming from my background, I drew from my love of behind the scenes drama of English and Irish, but then realized I couldn't fully express myself through that. So I went on a self-directed journey of artistic exploration, returning to the roots of creativity through a process of constant self-examination and re-engagement with
oh my God, I've got to get that clip where I put in.
No, you really shouldn't. That's the kind of thing that's on my CV, and it's bullshit. It's commercial bullshit.
And it's also true. That is also a way of saying what happened, but that's not what it feels like. Because I have this with my own professional journey as well, whereas there's a way I can tell my journey that sounds like I did A, which led to B, which led to C, which led to D, and now I'm here. Where in actual fact it was I tried 6 different fucking things. None of them worked. I did this by mistake. I went down a dead end for 18 months. And it feels more like failure when you're in it. And I think maybe it's different for different people, but I definitely strongly relate to what you're saying there, Jane, in that you do, what's that Samuel Beckett quote, try, fail, try again, fail better, you know? And even what you're saying there about like reaching a certain level of proficiency where it becomes a bit bland, it reminds me of this Bruce Lee quote where he's like, the easiest person to fight against is an intermediate, because they're trying to be aware. They've got a little bit of training. They're like, okay, I should be doing this. I should be doing this. He's like, obviously it's very hard to fight against a master. He's like, it's also very hard to fight against a beginner because you have no idea what they're going to do.
Yeah.
But you have to go through that intermediate phase of being overly cognizant and self-critical and self-reflective, and frankly, probably see a little bit of a dip in your ability or your output to get back to the master phrase. And in Chinese thinking, we talked about Lao Tzu the last day, one of the great Chinese philosophers. Lao means old or venerable, and Tzu means master, but Tzu also means child.
Okay.
So it can be like venerable master,
Yes.
or it could be wise child. And it's this idea of coming back around. I think Picasso said this as well. He spent most of his later years trying to learn to
draw
think
like
and
a
draw
child.
like a child again,
and
you know?
that's where even I would have kind of confided in my tutors in college, where they can kind of actively encourage you to be in touch with your childlike side. But sometimes for me, I find that my style, quote unquote, is like handwriting. I don't know how to turn away from it. I'm like, I've tried drawing with my other hand. It still turns out the same way. It's like something as natural as
That's
breathing.
mad.
Yeah.
So it's where even in my writing of the book that I have for the tutorials, it was really difficult. I even wrote it in the kind of blurb I had about the release. I said it was a real personal challenge for me, because it's like, how do you teach someone how to breathe? You just do it. That's
This
the
is a
thing.
book you wrote for when you were teaching classes.
No, this is the book that'll be coming out in December. It's like all about watercolor, teaching people how to paint, beginners. So it's difficult to almost break down your process to a corpse and like look at the skeleton of it and wonder, why am I doing what I'm doing? I have no idea, and I don't know how to explain it either, because it's I just do it. That's the thing. So that's why I find it really difficult actually to teach people, because I'm like, you just do it. I don't know.
It might nearly feel a bit dangerous to you or something when you're like, I'm just sick. I like how you say like a corpse. There's this song, I don't know what the guy's called now, but it's this you're doing it wrong, dissecting the bird, trying to find the song. I thought that's a good line. You know, where it's like the song of your art, you can't. That's not something you're going to be able to teach them. You're going to be able to teach them maybe how to fly. I don't know how far I can stretch this metaphor, but yeah, like it's their song in the end.
Like one thing I found actually in writing the book, I was like, one of the most important parts in which I find has come again full circle, is people think that I'm like a watercolor artist. It's actually that I'm a drafts person, because in the writing of the book, I'm teaching people how to utilize watercolors in a certain style. But in the making of it, I was like, well, these people will need to know how to draw, because that's the whole essence of it, is what the drawings look like. So I had to include templates. So it's like where they're like filling it in. It's very much beginners, but I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's not actually the filling in of the object. It's the outline in itself, which is the most important part to me as well. And even when I kind of think about, maybe some people think that my work is quite twee and very pastoral, and I can maybe agree with that to a certain extent. It's where I think I'm much like the Egyptians, not saying that I'm a god or anything, but curating certain parts of nature to give a certain feeling that I have from my own childhood, of like opening up, you know, the illustrated books with the big double page spreads of the amazing traditional illustrations. That feeling is what I'm trying to curate for myself, and I'm really glad that other people feel the same way about it. So in the book, I'm giving the basics, but it's the drawing actually that's the most important part. So I'm kind of like, God, I can never get away from it. I can never get away from this like real pedantic perfectionism, but maybe that part is stripped down. I don't know.
Yeah, but if you're trying to teach, you know, you were asked to teach people how to do watercolors, and then you're like, oh, actually, what you need to do is you need to understand templates and perspective and draftsmanship and so on. you know, sometimes, like you talked about how people perceive you. Like people might perceive you as a watercolor artist, but what they're connecting with in your work is this curatorship of your own memories and this other skill set that's a little bit invisible of the drawing. And so sometimes when you're asked to teach like the superficial thing, the thing that's very visible, the watercolor, you're like, that's actually not what you want.
Yeah.
You know, you actually need to teach what's beneath that, but that can often be a lot more difficult.
Yeah, that's the part that I don't know how to teach, because I don't know, do you guys like believe in talent? Or I always ask people that. I don't know.
That's a deep question.
Or like, because
Yeah, I do, I suppose.
Because whenever people say to my father, he's so lovely, they'd be like, oh, like, she's so talented. And like, it's even embarrassing to say that. I'm just like, ugh, like the fact that other people say that. But but my dad would be like, oh, she was born with that. And I don't know if I believe that, because I do think that talent is an interest that was nurtured, because all I remember from my childhood is just sitting at the table doing it over and over and over, drawing over and over books, and, you know, the stacks of printer paper that I would just take one after the other. And I don't think that the thing is, I'm like, what sparks it in childhood? Because I don't remember that part, but I remember the act of just doing it for my own pleasure. So when he goes, oh, she was born with that, and I do think people believe that. I don't know if I do. That's the only thing. I think, again, it breaks down. I think it can sometimes make art feel polarizing to the people that can't draw. That's, again, quote unquote. And I don't want to feel that disconnect with people. I really want people and art to be for everybody. Because
I think everyone has a spark. Some kind of, maybe more than one, but I really believe you kind of incarnate with that spark, and then that gets fed. And sometimes it can also be in response to something that you didn't arrive here with, but that's something painful that you need to process. But I think it's actually not exclusive when you say, oh, you're talented, because I think those people who can't draw, I'm sure there's something else they can do. I think just for some people it's unclear, and maybe it doesn't get nurtured. But I loved how you were talking about it there as well, when you would say, I'm not a god. It was very interesting, because it's nearly like you're actually quite modest, but there is something moving through you which spans the entire heights and lows of creativity. So it's and you make it quite visible as well. You're quite open and vulnerable in a beautiful way. I find it quite moving listening to you. You know, it's oh, there he is again with his fucking emotional incontinence. I know. Okay, that's just my role. Okay, he's the smart one. I'm the emotional one. But it's wonderful, because you're like, no, obviously I'm not. But I did need to mention it, because there is some kind of, and I'm not saying it's conceited at all, but it's more like, you know, that what flows through you is actually the whole range. And maybe sometimes you feel like you're too good, actually. You'd like to be a bit worse.
Yeah. It sounds terrible, because like, even when I don't know, is it that I want to be worse? I have like wonderful friends that are wonderful painters. I think that my problem is that I'm really afraid to make bad, ugly art. And even I was talking to my friend last night. I felt really frustrated, because I was like, oh, like, how does one even talk about what good art is? And he'd said to me, he was like, there is no good art. And that's the thing I remember saying over and over. I felt really frustrated in college often that there was no answer in a book. It's not objective. Everything is so subjective. It's where I wish that someone could show me in like a quantifiable way with charts what good art is, because
just dissect the bird.
Yeah,
find
that's
the
the
art.
thing. It's so,
and it'd be so dead then. You know that as well. Like, if somebody went, right, there you go, Jane, you'd be like, oh, geez, I have to do something else now.
It's
be
about
done.
the search. It reminds me of the jazz guitarist Pat Metheny. He has an album called Zero Tolerance for Silence, and it's so divisive. And please, anyone listening, throw on Zero Tolerance for Silence and let us know in the comments if it's a joke or not. There's two theories about it. One is that Pat Metheny was exploring something incredibly new that no one else had ever done, and no one else has done since. And it's an extraordinary, brave piece of art. The other theory is that he was unhappy with his contract with the record label and wanted to make something so bad that they'd fucking drop him, right? And nobody knows. I've talked to people.
It can be both. It can be perfect, or it can be worthless.
It's this, like, it's just tracks of wild, distorted guitars layered four on top of each other. And I think it's fucking fascinating. And I know people that have been listening to this album for 15 years and keep going back and forth. It's a joke. It's genius. It's a joke. It's genius, you know? And that's that, you know, I think there's a difference between art and craft. I definitely think you can improve your craft. You can improve your capability with watercolors or with music or whatever. But I'm not sure you can teach art. And I think that's maybe where the talent comes in. Like your ability to connect with something worth saying, I think might be not necessarily inherent, but not necessarily possible to teach either. Whereas craft can be taught, you know, or it can be nurtured. But then you release it, and that's something else as well, because you have no control over how people respond to it. So that Pat Metheny album, you don't know. Is it good art? Is it bad art?
And it's not,
There's no
because
answer.
it isn't. It's not like pure talent as we understand it. It's nearly. I like that idea of a spark because it's something that keeps you coming back to it as well. Whereas, like, even if you like Bart, I can teach you in a year to draw perfectly. I'd be like, oh, that'd be nice. But would I actually go back to it all the time? Because it's probably just not my bag. But I like what you were saying there as well about the kind of the ability to connect to something real or something. Like we were talking about this the other day. I think we're with a band who play really proficient trad, and then they have songs with lyrics, and the lyrics are just as if they took the rhyming dictionary and just and it, but they're very proficient. But it just, so I do think that you can learn and develop that as well. But I think it's probably kind of found in the crucible of life, and not, but you need that original spark as well. That thing about is something garbage or is something art is so interesting. A friend of mine in Holland makes like death metal, or I don't even know what you call it. They're very popular in the Slavic countries. So it's so funny. Like, he's an archaeologist and he's obsessed with skulls. The whole house is full. He's the loveliest man, but skulls everywhere. And then every couple of years they make like a death metal album. And I think the deal they have is kind of, they don't make money for it, but the label pays for the recording or something, and then they go and tour Russia. And one of the reviews they got was barbed wire and concentration camps, 9 out of 10. So that just goes to show, like, and people were just like, you can't really listen to it in one go because you will die, but we love it. Or so, there's something so mad about that.
Yeah.
But that's what it is.
Eric Satie had the idea of furniture music, which was just music composed for a purpose. He's like, here's a piece that will help people move through a marketplace more efficiently. Here's something that will relax people in a hotel lobby. And for him, failure or success in that piece of music was not how beautiful it was, but how functional it was, which is not something we often think about overtly with art, but it's often there, especially when you're trying to sell it, basically, when you're trying to promote it. Like, if you take really boring landscape photos that fit really nicely in a hotel, you'll probably make quite a lot of money off those. But if you take challenging landscape photos that are a little bit uncomfortable to look at, they might be better in some regard, but they'll definitely not be as acceptable on a broad sense. And I think that's another place failure can come in for artists as well, is because we have, everyone has to eat, right? And I think, like, some artists, how do you measure success? Well, if you're making enough to eat, that's nice. Yeah. But that might be at odds with what you actually want to be doing. Like you said, Jane, like you're known for a very particular style, and you maybe feel a little bit unable to move out of that style sometimes.
Yeah, like that's. I've kind of even thought about that myself, and I'm very privileged to be able to eat and make my job. But I think that's where that takes probably years and years of refining to understand actually what is success to you once you make past the stage of making money. That's when you can kind of start to play with the concept of what's my identity, which can be kind of difficult, because for me at this stage, and I'm sure that this is to change, for me it's actually the not so much the finished product, it's again the in between of that alphabet that I talked about. It's not about the Z product, it's actually the in between. It's the act of making it for me, which is the most important part. I think we kind of talked about, even before we turn on the microphones, about the nothingness place, the thin place as we call it. And for me, that's actually the act of creating. It's almost like this thin veil when I'm making something. It's like a vacuum bubble where nothing exists outside of me and the desk. And it's really cathartic, actually. It's very calming for someone who might be like me, maybe a little bit like anxious, maybe emotionally turbulent. You know, I often say the turbulence of the studio all goes away in the real act of drawing. It's like a ritual, and that for me is my artistic practice. The end product, people enjoy it, and that's where I'm able to get my money, which is absolutely wonderful. But that's where I'm kind of exploring now. I'm like, what is success for me as an artist now? It's when I can enter that state of calm in the act of making it. And before, it probably would have been being able to make money from it, which comes with huge pressures. Because when I was in college as well, I often kind of explain to people as well, there's the art that I make commercially, which is the one that people are most familiar with me with. And then there's art that I make in my own personal life, which is similar, but it explores maybe more challenging themes of like life and death in art, the morbid beauty of it. I would have used to had, this is very not controversial, but I used to have like dead birds in the freezer at college, that because it's the only way that you can get so close up and intimate with such a beautiful object is when they're dead in your hand. So I remember when I was in college, I would have really kind of wanted to, I felt that numbness and felt the dissatisfaction of what I was doing. It was working, but I didn't feel really creatively satisfied by it. So I said that, it was in my final year as well, so I said that I'd actually challenge myself with making landscape paintings. And I worked really, really hard for like maybe 2 months in the studio every day, staying late and everything, making these paintings of kind of about the body in response to a landscape. And it was paired with like life drawings, so it was very much a body interwoven with the burn, like the rocks and things like that. So the fact I felt it was such a oddly specific landscape, maybe it might have been a bit alienating to people who had never visited the area before, but I felt really satisfied in the act of making them. It was so uplifting to me. I felt really fulfilled and doing something different to what I had been doing for so long. And it was kind of integrated with drawings of like dead animals that would have been from the area that I would have found as roadkill and things like this. So I was really nervous then the week coming up to presenting it to my class, and not one of them was received well. None of them. So that really kind of, I was like, how can that's kind of one failure for me.
Can I say, is that failure still very alive in you, Jane?
Yes, because I think I'd even mentioned it when we met before, that people said to me, I thought you would never hurt a thing, as if I went out to kill these animals. But the fact that I was interested in something that wasn't as sweet and beautiful, it made me really angry, because I was like, am I not allowed? It felt like I almost needed to ask permission to explore something that isn't even inherently that morbid. It's just life and death is natural. Yeah, that's all encapsulated.
I love how we got around to this, because this is actually what I wrote down, was that there's a real sweetness to your art. But then it put me in mind, I'm always coming up with stupid song lyrics, but I think this is appropriate as a Sting song, where he says like, when nature's red in tooth and claw, like winters freeze and summers thaw. And I was thinking like, people really resonate with your sweetness, but nature, it's all, or a lot of it is about nature, but nature has the claw as well. It's like
so
like
cruel,
in tooth and claw. It's not like, and it's a kind of nearly that Victorian idea of like, oh, the birds and the bees and la 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 la. And it's like, have you seen what the birds and the bees do to each other? You know, it's like that's God's. I liked what you were saying before about God's creation. God's creation is beautiful,
and it's
and
also
it's
so cruel.
vicious. It's like parasites crawling into things' brains, and it's so it's kind of would nearly be strange to go, Jane is really connected to nature. Her art is really connected to nature, but don't be bringing the claw, you know.
Yeah, it made me feel, obviously it made me feel really sad, because I think that when you are really emotionally attached to the making of the process, that means that, well, kind of one thing I say as well about going back to why isn't there an answer in a book, I often think that when you go to college to be an artist, versus, say if you went to college to be a scientist or something, you're kind of learning how to use the pipettes, learning how to, read the formulas. Whereas when you're going to art school, you're actually learning how to be more authentically yourself, which is really hard. It's like you can't just take that hat off at the end of the day. You have to be yourself all the time, which is, does anybody know who they truly are? It's again like the perception of how other people can perceive you. It's difficult. So when you're making art which is authentically you, and then it's not received well, then you're like, I'm a terrible person, I'm a horrible friend, I'm a horrible daughter, everyone hates me, oh my god. And then this is where I can find it really difficult actually to reflect on old work that I've made, because when you're first starting to make art, everyone makes terrible art. It's cringy. It's so bad. You think you're amazing. Like, and that's the thing. You want to be great. I'm an artist now. You know, I'm going to talk about society. You look back and I've burned things. I've broken my, there again, it's a cathartic release of seeing it go up in smoke. It's like the demons are just like released. And that means that no one can ever see that part of me. You've destroyed it. So I can only continue from here on now, curating myself how I want people to see me. Everything else is destroyed. So I can find it really difficult to go back over old work that I've made. In that moment, I thought it was good, but it can be maybe a reflection on a certain time in your life. It's so saturated with who you were. It is almost like a Horcrux. It's like a piece of you.
Nice.
I had... So my big failure is music, right? I got a degree in music, and I realized within the first 3 months that I wasn't good enough, you know. I was
but also,
studying
like, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I was studying, you know, I came from a smaller town, and then I went to Cork City, and I saw what real musicians looked like. And just in terms of capability, as in they had a broader range of skills, as in they could play more instruments, more styles of music, and they had a deeper proficiency with those skills as well. And I was like, okay, that's what a quote unquote real musician looks like, and that's not what I am. But I loved it, and I wasn't brave enough to drop out, so I stuck with it, and I got my degree. But before I went to college, I was in a few rock bands around Tralee. I used to have shoulder length, like manky gelled hair and a Matrix leather jacket. You know, it was the style at the time. What are you laughing at, Jane?
It's like the milady.
Yeah, and I was rightly bullied for it, but I played in a few like just angry rock bands, and looking back in it, like just, you know, 16 years old, full of arrogance and thinking you're the hot shit and stuff like that. And then went to university, learned a few things, learned hopefully a bit of humility, and was like, okay, I'm not that. And then completely turned away from that and went down a different path and so on, and didn't think about that part of my life. Really destroyed the Horcrux. And then moved to Clare 3 years ago, and was sat out the back of a pub, and I was introduced to somebody. She was John Lillis, former guest, and I was like, "How's it going? My name's, you know, Anthony." And John was just like, "Were you in a rock band called Stupid Betty in Tralee?" And I'm like, that was 20 years ago. That man is dead. I fucking buried him, John. Don't be digging up the horrible corpse of that angry teenager. And John was like, nah, you were great. So John was involved in booking an event there that happened every month or so, a Clubhead Bang Bang, which is way ahead of its time. Phenomenal event for anyone who remembers. But they would get in big bands like 10-7, De Laurentiis, what's Ed Sheeran's cousin? Anyway, Laura Sheeran. And then they would hire the local teenage fucking rockers to play support. But it was so weird for me that I'd spent 15 years distancing myself from that part of my life to meet somebody who only knew me from then. And to be like, yeah, that was great. Yeah, you were great at what you know, for what it was. Intensely uncomfortable, Jane. But that's the thing about failure, is that was a huge failure for me, but like I'm only here because of it. I'm only in Clare because of it. And how do you reconcile the fact that it was a failure in the moment, but
like, that's the thing. It's where are you able to grant yourself the same grace? It's very much like being kind to yourself, because I think that there's nothing more endearing than people like that story. It's so sweet. It's so beautiful. Like I love hearing other people's quote unquote failures. I would never believe that they would be, you know. I think we can really catastrophize our own thing. It's so difficult to face our own failures, because I don't know, maybe it's a type of personality or something. But for myself, I'm like, because I think of it as a direct reflection on me and how other people see me. But I love vulnerability in other people. I'm like, why can't I be kind to myself? Because even in that story, I really appreciate that you said that. I feel like I'm a better friend to you now, because I know that it's like, to know that the deeper roots of somebody is such a gift. And I'm like, I can never let anybody know that about me. Like it's so exposing. I don't know.
Someone once explained like extroversion, introversion to me is like that introverts take the outer world inside and really connect it to themselves. So it's nearly what you're saying. It's like that art is so connected to me, but I'm interested in that part of the burning of it. Because like even with this podcast now, part of it is that it should remain. Even if tomorrow someone comes up and goes, Bart, we're going to never work with you again because we heard what you said on that terrible podcast. I think it should. You were
a Sting fan.
Yeah, exactly. Fucking Sting. It should. I feel it should remain. You know, and but then as well, I know that burning something can also be cathartic, and sometimes I do think that's a good thing. But I'm wondering if you won't feel regret, you know, at a certain point when you're like, oh, actually, I would love to see. I heard a friend of mine who writes beautiful music. He said, I have a half-finished song from when I was 16. God, I wish that guy had finished that song because I could never write it again now. You know. It's interesting, yeah.
It's like probably he sees the childlike kind of the primal art that he would have made and not realizing it in the moment. But that's why I have such an affinity for books and sketchbooks, because it's something that can be closed and tied up and put away. And that was one thing that was really criticized of me in college and things like that, was I never put anything on the wall. It was that I was always putting stuff in books because I could close them and stack things on top of them, and then I would have like piles, and I still do every day almost. I'll put something in a sketchbook. I'll carry a sketchbook with me, and I have collection. I'll never burn those because I think it becomes an object, and I love the object of a book and the consideration of what paper you're using and all these things. I think it's a really special thing, but the fact it can be closed is like Pandora's book box.
but there's something as well about kind of regulating yourself. When we were just talking about like the success of art, there's this Doctor Who episode where Vincent van Gogh.
Oh, that's right.
Yes, guys, I know this is when you can't pronounce Van Gogh, but where he comes in and
look at you showing off how you could pronounce surnames
for my own country, exactly, my own country. But he comes to the Tate or wherever his work is. It's not in Tate, that's modern. Anyway, he Rijksmuseum probably.
That's it.
And he's kind of so emotional about seeing, because he had like kind of the most success with the worst personal experience, and that's kind of I heard you discuss that a bit as well, where you feel like I'm emotionally quite turbulent, so I have to manage that. And I think it is the artistic temperament. I know that sounds a bit shit, but there is definitely. Oh, we talked about this before when we met in Kilfenora, that in Terry Pratchett there is that character who can make the most beautiful things, and then they try to fix his psychology because he's so unhappy, and then he just draws stick figures and it's nothing, and they're like, sorry man, we're putting it all the trauma back. Not that I'm putting trauma on you, but you know what I mean, like that there is on the one hand that and I'm like that as well, like it's very up and down, and who are you really, because the one day you're the super positive confident person, and then the next day you're like, I'm worthless, you know. But you also have to manage, I suppose, your own life so that you can also, well, just for living, but also so that you can keep creating art.
Because I think that almost the concept of the tortured poet, the Swifties are listening, the tortured artist can be kind of romanticized as well, because
it's no crack.
Like it's where I don't know, like 19th century poets and playwrights would have really thought that to be melancholy was to be authentic. That's what they would have made, like these really turbulent pieces of art in response to like a divine experience or something. And I think that there's something so lovely about just nice art. I think you'd said that before, art where there's sometimes that like you kind of hate art that's just like kind of shrouded and it's very like knotted up in just anguish just for the sake of it, you know. And if anything, I think that's kind of a bit silly, you know, sometimes when it's just,
and it's easy.
It's kind of it's a bit it's cringy. It's kind of, sometimes it's a bit eye roll. I think that good art is something, again, here I am I gatekeeping? I don't know. That's the thing. That's where I don't know what good
you're
art is.
expressing how you feel about it.
But I think that sometimes good art is something that just maybe can resonate with you because you think it's beautiful, and it doesn't have to be more complex than that. It's like, I just like it because I like the way it looks. It doesn't need to have turn my life upside down, or that's where a lot of, again, my insecurities come from as an artist, because I worry that I don't have a voice in a political sense, a social context, as a woman artist, anything like that. I'm like, sometimes I just want to make art for the act of making it, like I spoke about, but the image itself is very
but you're making art for nature. You talked about the history of art being for the greater glory of God, and then people turned away from that, and art became about the human. And now you're kind of turning back to nature. Like, your art is not about you so much, it's about your relationship with nature. Would it be fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I often think about this, we mentioned contemporary art as well. Modern music was really interesting, where you had classical music where you have the idea of the devil's interval, the tritone, the flat fifth, which is a very dissonant interval. People say it was banned. It wasn't actually banned, but the idea was, because you're making music for God, why would you ever use an unpleasant interval? Everything should be consonant because it's God. God doesn't make mistakes. And an interval like that sounds like a mistake. Then we moved away from that, and we started using more atonality and complexity in music to convey more complex emotions, like anguish. Okay, you can use a dominant seventh chord for anguish, and that heightens the message. But then to take it to like this crazy extreme, you then had artists or musicians like Schopenhauer, who was like, okay, now there's going to be no harmony. So we had complete harmony, we had harmony and disharmony and resolution. Now we're just going to have disharmony, because that's the way humanity's going. We're progressing. The next stage of music will be serialism, where everything is like based on the mathematical relationships with notes, and there's no conventional harmony. It's very difficult to listen to, and this is the next evolution of music. And the really interesting thing about that is it wasn't. They developed it. Schopenhauer he is influential, but music did not go that way. Music, people still prefer harmony, and you can definitely have different flavors of harmony, more or less. Like bebop sounds very different to trad, but to do away with that idea of harmony and consonance and aesthetic being just pleasant, people don't really go for that. And I think we have it, like you see it in telly and stuff. Like, one of my bugbears is just kind of middle class or wealthy TV series about middle class or wealthy Americans with very little problems that are very well acted and well produced. And I'm like, I'm so tired of seeing this. The flip side of that is, if you keep doing something over and over and over and over and over, it can be kind of interesting as well. Like, I often think about the jazz standard Autumn Leaves. There are 10,000 covers of it. And like, it's really boring, but if you keep doing it, eventually you find something cool in it again, So I don't think there's any one answer, but I think it's important to know where you stand at the moment. And I would agree with you, Jane. I think it's important to make beautiful art, and I think even in a world where there are terrible things happening and great social injustices, and I think it's more important to make aesthetically beautiful art and maybe to make art about things that are bigger than humanity. When we are so focused on the evils of humanity, I think that can be very cathartic.
Yeah, it's almost like an escape world, and that's where I kind of come back again to the act of making it is like an escape world. Not that you have anything inherently to escape from in your own life, but it's like a safety bubble. It's like a blanket that just is so warming. And I don't know if people will really understand what I mean, but I kind of talk about it in a flow state. I don't know, like, do you relate to that when you're playing? It's like where nothing exists outside of this. It's so safe. It feels like home. It's so, nothing can hurt you outside of this, and it just is the most special place to be in. It's where time can actually not exist then as well, where it can go so quickly from day to night. You haven't stood up in hours, which can also be, that's where it can become harmful, I think, in ways where when you're working from home and you're reliant on these things sometimes for your income and working as a freelancer, you can do harm to yourself because there's no boundaries. It's like every hour is a working hour. There's also where sometimes you will work to the bone that you're not getting paid for the amount of hours. So it can be really difficult sometimes for me, because I care about it so much, to actually regulate how much I give to people who don't show me the same respect for it. Because even, I won't mention names or anything, but like I've been approached by brands and things that where there's an expectation from the go that they're not going to pay me. It's the E word, exposure.
Yeah.
My stomach is full of exposure. I'm so full. And I think that you can kind of like curate the situation where you can actually offer to work for free, but that's under your own permission. It's kind of where like I'm setting up the boundaries here, but when there's an expectation that you're going to work for free, already they don't have respect for you. So it's kind of where you give an inch, they'll take a mile. So where it would have been an amazing opportunity, I've had to say no. And I'm like, is that a failure? It's like, how do I approach it? Where you can do things to propel your career, but it just further heightens the culture that artists don't get paid. So I don't want to add to that. But when I offer sometimes to pay to work for free, that's under my
my
you
know what the bargain is.
Yeah,
there.
but when it's an expectation, then it's where.
But it's also kind of like you can always, in every situation like that, you can weigh up like, what am I getting or giving from this, and what is the thing. When people go, oh, there's exposure for you, it's nearly as if someone's giving me a cookie I never asked for. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't particularly need exposure, thanks, or not that kind of exposure, or what I actually need is this thing. But sometimes then you will do something for free because you're like, I'm giving something back, which sometimes is important. Or I really like that person. That person has already done me a few solids, so it's nearly like a trade.
An exchange, yeah.
And that's so different. But when people, I was actually approached to do something with a friend of mine musically for a big Irish fashion brand, and I was kind of like, that's pretty cool. But just the way they approach it, where there was like, we're never going to give you anywhere near enough money because exposure, and I was just like, piss off. And they didn't even get back to me, and then I was like, because it was too high for them, and then I was like, well, you let me know what you think is fair, and they couldn't, because they just kind of wanted to weasel out of it. You're like, this is not a nice
and that's
exchange.
One thing actually that's really difficult, I think, that any artist or creative is actually pricing your work. We even spoke about this at the table. It's like, how do you get that good balance of paying what you've spent years refining versus what's actually realistic? Because I think that if you were to be able to price something per hour, oh my goodness, you'd be like a millionaire if people paid that money. That's the thing, because you're spending hours and hours and hours plus kind of your set rate, but it's being able to, again, regulate. I'm going to work this much and not do any more because this is what the exchange is. This is how much I'm getting paid. How can I make this a realistic working situation where I'm not just working all the time and actually then not getting a lot of time for my own personal fulfilling art. So I'm still trying to actually figure out that landscape. It's so difficult pricing your work and also putting in the set amount of hours and no more. Cutting it off there, that's really difficult for me.
Yeah, I think it's all about being honest. I was even thinking about this when you were saying, oh, I'm not politically minded because I nearly feel like I need to be as a woman artist. And I think with all that stuff with art, if it's honest, it resonates. And when people like it's real. I find it really cringe how many people think they need to have a political opinion, and they have the most pat, like kind of just ready-made political opinions. Like, I'm so glad I'm involved in this cause. Oh, I know a very successful artist who did this recently, and I just like, ooh, your opinion is so not valuable in this. I'm sorry. I know that's a really gatekeepy or arrogant thing to say, but I'm just going to vent my fucking ire, I don't know, or my spleen or whatever people say in English. But it's just like I as has been evident from this podcast, I love John Spillane. And he was on the Tommy Tiernan show, and Tommy Tiernan was like, do you not think you need to be more political like Christy Moore? And he's like, no. I like talking about the Irish history, revolution. Otherwise, I'm just a love poet.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's so honest, you know. And then it's like, even with there's the European Football Championships on at the moment, which I enjoy watching. And there was one of the French strikers, Kylian Mbappe, who was like, we need to be political, and people in France need to go out and vote because this, that, and the other, and extremes, and blah 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 blah. And then all these other players got asked, and one of the Spanish guys, who I think is also from Catalonia, so it was a whole different backdrop as well. And he was like, "Yeah, I'm here to play football, guys," and he got so much grief over it. I'm like, why? Why does everyone need to be the same? If you don't feel that that's your role, then that, I would say in your case, maybe the thing that you would like to. I don't know this, but I'm wondering, I'm asking, you'd like to express is that there is some anger with that bit of like, oh, you want me to be sweet, do you? You want me to be that version of nature. That's something where I'm like, oh, that might be worth expressing. But not necessarily like, and now I'm going to stand up because people are putting down women because they only need to be sweet. Maybe that is what you would like to say. But maybe it's also like, no, people just want nature to be sweet. Like, whatever that is, if that's your honest expression, I think that's going to be awesome.
I think that for me, and it's where I envy a lot of my friend artists that are amazingly talented, it's that they, it's not that they don't have consideration for who is looking at the art, and it's not that they're flippant about it, it's that they just create for them, and I do that too, but I also am very conscious about who's going to see it, and I'm notoriously private in that way, where I feel like art often is so exposing of my soul. It's almost like someone looking up my skirt or opening my diary and reading it. So oftentimes I'll be very pared back to what I show just anybody. It's where the people that I hold the closest to me, it's like telling them a secret. So that part of me where maybe people perceive me, I understand it. It's where they would see me as sweet, but it's where I would hope that they understand that I'm a more multifaceted person once I give them the permission to be let into that world.
Can I jump in there, Jane?
Absolutely.
I'm thinking back to when you presented to your class in art college and they responded so badly to that change. Do you think that is influencing?
It is, because it kind of was like, oh, again, the art is bad, so I'm bad.
Yeah.
You hate me, everyone hates me. And it's where learning to understand then, is that a failure or was it successful because I felt fulfilled by it? So it's kind of asking then, am I being selfish because I'm doing things that only fulfill me? But sometimes that's what it's about, because if you try to please everyone, you're wasting your time. I think that's the thing. And that's where I understand, and it can be really difficult as well. And where I ask sometimes my male friends, like, do you like my art? And they're like, I like it, but I wouldn't have it on my wall, because I think sometimes it's inherently feminine, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Maybe we won't go into that today, but I think there is, again, a sweetness to it that which maybe only appeals. And I do notice that with my own audience. It's 99% women. And it's where sometimes I'm like, oh, well, then maybe I need to appeal to everybody, but I don't know what that is. It's where in this moment, in the act of me creating it, I feel really safe and fulfilled. So that might change, but sometimes the personal art that I would want to make, the idea of showing it in an exhibition, oh my God, that's horrible. I would have to go under like a pseudonym or something.
You said that so beautifully, like it's like sharing a secret. I think that's
so
gorgeous. But that says so much. Like, but also I think, I don't know who I heard say this the other day, but it's like they ordered you. The universe. If there he goes again with his wishy-washy, airy-fairy shite. But like, the universe ordered you. It's kind of no sense making a weakened Jane Carkill version. Like, it's like, this is the thing that lights that spark. Isn't that what we all want? By the way, I'm saying this very authoritatively. Obviously, I don't do that myself. like I need to hear this as well. Like, but isn't that like, it's easier to say to someone else, maybe I'll listen back to this and just sub in my name. But like, isn't you're what they ordered? Like, why would you do something that doesn't fulfill you?
And would you ever consider making people angry or disgusted or shocked a metric for success? Or is that always... that's always seen as a failure, but sometimes you need to shock people. Yeah. And sometimes you need to make them angry. And I just wonder if like you were like going into that, that exhibition or showing your class and stuff, you're like, this is going to really fucking rattle them.
And if anything, I kind of consider that it's where I don't feed off of that kind of reaction, actually. It's where I actually don't know what react. I just want it to be accepted maybe in just a very, again, that numb way of just like, it's just fine, like, or it's amazing, but not in a way where it's disgusting. I actually would feel like I could never do that again. I would feel like a bit shriveled if they were disgusted by it. And some people really feed off of being chaotic, I think, which I don't. So it was where it was a huge risk for me. And there's a huge, that's the thing, I hate instability. I don't like that. So the idea of presenting something, and it's funny because it's not even inherently different. It definitely would have been recognizable as me. I think it's just more so the idea that I could enjoy things like taxidermy, or to be able to perceive that nature is also the death of nature. It's horrible and cruel, because even like growing up on a farm, you see death of calves and things. Like I always have this story that stands out. I remember me and my mother were watching a calf crowning from in a birth on the hill with binoculars, and we could see the face coming out. So it's like amazing life. All of a sudden a fox comes and eats the face, and all we could do was stand and watch with the binoculars.
Wow.
So I think that again, it's so beautiful to, like, it's almost like a scene from a film. It's like it's so cruel that it's beautiful. It's so cruel that it's precious. So that's why when I see things like roadkill, or seeing a dead animal in that way, it's something so, it feels divine to see them so up close and hold it in your hand and look into its face, because it seems so forbidden to actually see them in real life. You know, an owl or something, you never see them in real life, only in books. So to be so up close with them is so special to me. That's why I'd love to have like taxidermied animals and things, and people are like, oh, that's shocking. I'm just like, is it though?
It's really healthy, doesn't it?
It is, but I don't think there's a way to present that story you told without it being shocking. So I think, look, what I'm trying to get across, and it's like Bart said, I don't do this either. It's something I try to do, but it's literally get comfortable with the discomfort. You know, and you know, I learned a lot from sparring and stuff, and one thing sparring taught me was that you can fail all the time, and you just go again. You go 3 minutes, you get your ass handed to you, and then you go again. I trained MMA for a couple of months in Tralee, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and this fella was just, he handed me my ass for like 40 minutes, and I was tired after like 4. Okay, so he was just ragdolling me, right? I was a training dummy to him. Okay,
it's like a hula hoop, like
it was embarrassing. And at the end, I didn't really know him that well, so I was chatting to him, and I was like, "Are you busy at the moment?" He's like, "Oh, I've got exams, you know. I'm in second year." And I was like, "Oh, what university are you in?" He's like, "No, I'm in secondary school." literally half my age. So I was like, done. You know? But it's this, you know, I love the concept of alchemy, where you take something and you turn it into something else. You turn lead into gold, or pain into, you know, there's a way to process it that, you know, you just keep going in, you keep sparring, you keep doing rounds, and you keep losing, and you keep losing, and you keep losing, and it hurts, and you're tired, but you're all of a sudden you're like, oh, if it stops hurting, you're like, I'm not improving anymore. If it gets easy, you're like, oh no, this is not what it's actually about. So you learn to crave that challenge and that pain and that failure. And I think it comes naturally to some people, and then some people, it really doesn't, especially artists.
But there's something with that. Is it called proximal development, or it's that kind of thing where you kind of want to find that sweet spot where there's the resistance and there's the positive. Because I was even just thinking about what I was just saying to you. I was like, there's so many problems with it. Because in a way, I 100% believe it. Like, you should be fulfilled by the art you make, because that's the thing. That is the design in a way, I think. But then also I know for myself, like, I don't know if what I put out musically is good until sometimes people tell me. Like, there's certain things where I'm like, would anyone want to hear this? And then 10 people tell me, oh, I really thought that was a good song. I'm like, okay, but I can't just make it to please them. So it's so hard to find. So I do understand how that happens, but there is like you said, like, there's a divine beauty, not just in that shocking bit, but also there's divine beauty in you being able to see it like that. I nearly had this image of you going into like a dark cellar with a big flashlight and going.
Yeah.
Because that I do think you hear this in spiritual circles a lot. That's what the world kind of needs right now is for us to own our shadow rather than always be, oh, it's shocking. Like, and then there's the other side to that. Like, this is like what we were talking about in the conversation episode. Like, it's always like 90% this way and 10% that way. Like, anything I say, I disagree with. You know, like, because also I don't like it when people put shocking photos up on social media without any warning. You know, that. So that's not it either. Like, but there is a way to incorporate the harsh realities, and I think art is probably the best vehicle for it.
Yeah, it's where I think there was like a nice quote. It's like, I wrote it down here. It said, "Art is the exploration of life and death, but it is not a proper substitute for either." Which I thought was cool.
That's great.
It's unreal.
But even it's where, like, coming back to the sparring, and it's, you know, the way we had talked about, like, contentment can be really like an enemy for making progress. It's like when you're just content with your progress. But I also think that discontentment sometimes isn't always the answer, because I'm sometimes perfectly okay with being like terrible at stuff and then just like giving up because I'm like, oh,
Yes,
I just give up.
absolutely.
I just don't care. But I'm kind of like, why do I care so much about certain things that it like completely just embodies all of me in my life, and then I just don't care about other things at all. It's like, how does one? It's probably understanding then what is an interest that's nurtured and what's a talent. It's kind of what is in our brain that makes us engage with certain things and then not with others at all. Because say when I was learning how to drive, I was making mistakes all the time, and I'd be able to laugh at myself, and I think that's important, being able to laugh at myself. But when it comes to art and things, I remember even my tutor saying, "You're so serious," and I recognize that I'm serious. I'm like, why can't I laugh at myself in the thing that's most important in my life? But with other things, I'm just like, well, I'm not good at this, so I'm just going to give up. And like not being able to push myself in that way, like, or like rock climbing or something like that. I'm like, well, I know this is going terribly. I know I'm bad at it, so I'm just going to give up.
But it isn't your identity, I suppose.
It's kind of like what makes certain things my identity and what others.
Yeah.
Why do we attach to certain things? That's the thing.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think you could like you look at that in probably three ways, where you're like, either there's a bit of trauma or something that you're being triggered on. That's a way of looking at it. Or it's like, oh, you identify so strongly with it that you don't want that to be bad, because like you said, you'll be bad.
Yeah, it's like a mirror. It's like.
But then also maybe it's a very like I thought that was such a beautiful imagery. You said like it's like telling a secret or sharing my heart. Maybe it's also such a finely tuned instrument that it can't take too much grit or something, because it's like there was an interview once with Michael Caine on Parkinson on the fucking was it the BBC or whatever, ITV, whatever, British channel, and they were talking about being able to cry on command. And you can see Michael Caine, he kind of says something like, oh, I just have a thing that I go to. And you see that he's touching on it when he says it, and his eyes start to well up, and he's like, yeah, but you can't fucking play with it either, like, because it's real, and you don't want to be dulling the blade, kind of. So that's part, like, we never know. Like, there's so many facets
nuances,
to all of that.
Because I think when we talk about talent, I definitely think that both of you were probably born with the capability of being able to play by ear. Do you remember I had mentioned that like amazes me, that you can just do that. I don't understand it.
I can't do that.
Well, yeah, I think it's still really amazing.
I've got such a bad ear. I have to rely on music theory so much.
But even like being able to interpret the language of music, I think that there's something in your veins. I don't know, it's something magical. I think that there is magic in real life, and that I think is true when I see that, because I don't understand how it works. I don't get how somebody could just listen to something and then it just is in their hands. It is magic. I don't get it.
Yeah, but like you can see something and put it perfectly on a page. I will say, by the way, that I am the 1% of men who would definitely have your art on the wall. I'm really interested about that, what you were saying about the burn with the landscape, because I think the burn is the most fascinating landscape. I've always been so, like, when I first moved to Ireland, I lived in Galway, so it was like Connemara and the Burren, kind of, you know, those were the two choices. And for some reason, people who'd visit would always go, well, we rent a car and go to Connemara. And I think Connemara is starkly beautiful. But I didn't get any comfort. It's uncomfortable beauty. It's like prairie beauty. And then here in the Burren, I was just always like, oh, I love this. And people are like, oh, it's like a moon landscape. And I'm like, only at the surface, it's actually much more like what Luca Bloom says, the living rock, you know, and then our good friend Harry, who has the Lochavala farm, you know, he's our neighbor. I think it's really cool that I can say that he's kind of our neighbor now in Kilnaboy. Kilnaboy is secretly huge. Like, it's a tiny village, but actually it spans like a huge area. But he has like the green heart of the Burren. So I think, I'd love to see your art on the Burren, actually. Yeah.
Like, I think about the Burren, one thing about it is that it rewards. I think if somebody is really not really prone to be in touch with their observational side, you'll often see, like, if you've ever one of my stupid hobbies is like reading TripAdvisor reviews. So if you see people 1-star reviews on the Burren, nothing there. It's like, if anything, the Burren rewards observation so much because it's so bleak, but on the ground level, you can even see like the little kind of grikes in the rocks are like pots for plants. Like, there's like flowers sprouting out of teaspoons of soil. The sky is like ever changing from like pink to purple in one day. So if you're just driving through, I don't think it could ever be rewarded. So the fact that I've grown up here, and I even talk about today, where do I want to live in the future? There's always a drawback. I feel like I'm sewn into the land, and I feel strangely protective of it in a way, because I think I think that there's a huge change since COVID, actually, that people are really in touch with nature, thankfully. But I would just hope that it's something that will be looked after even beyond our generation.
Well, I think you said that you're a little bit apolitical, or you don't have like a social cause that you're, you know. I would say that like this affinity and promotion of nature is a really strong cause. And it reminds me of people that get married and they're like, we're having a humanist ceremony. And I don't think many of them are actually having a humanist ceremony. I think a lot of them they're just not having a Christian ceremony.
Exactly.
So they're having the other thing. Like, and there's no judgment here whatsoever. But I would not like to have a humanist ceremony. Because I don't place humanity in that pinnacle. I don't think we're the pinnacle of nature. I think, but I also don't think we're in opposition to nature. So, you know, myself and Katie are going to have an animist ceremony. Yeah. And,
okay.
Oh, that's
you
cool.
know, so because I don't believe that humanity is above nature, and I also don't believe that we're this horrible villain. We're doing a lot of terrible things to nature, but we are still a part of nature.
Yeah.
You know, and just as a tangent, I completely believe in the Gaia hypothesis, and I think if nature ever doesn't want us anymore, it'll just fucking kill us. And the fact that it hasn't so far means we are still serving some kind of purpose, even if we have really lost our way. And I think, just to say that promoting just the concept of nature and not getting lost in the weeds of, not the weeds, but like not going down the path of human-based social issues like so many artists are, I think that's really powerful. I think that is a stance, just personally. Sorry, Bart.
Yeah,
No, not at all. I shouldn't have put it in there, but I was just thinking the conceitedness of the people who are like, oh, we are, like, people saying we're being bad to nature, we should be better, 100%.
Yes, absolutely.
But the people who go, we shouldn't destroy the planet, I'm like, lads, the planet will, like you say, will allow us for as long as she will. We're going to be dead before the planet is dead, 100%. Like, if we fuck up the air, if we fuck up the earth, if we create mudslides, we're going to be gone. And it's not going to be an issue of like, oh, the earth won't be there. So, but they actually sort of they show you actually what they actually believe. What they say is, and this is so often the way people show you what they believe rather than what they say they believe, because they actually think we're above the planet.
Yes,
like, no,
that's
not
right.
at all.
Yeah. We're in control of nature.
Yeah,
and we're
completely.
doing
We're
a
in
bad
such
job.
control, and it's like, hey, why are you not looking after your dog? It's like, oh man, you've got this so the wrong way around. Like, yeah.
And that doesn't mean we can rest on our laurels. Like,
exactly.
we need to do a lot more work. But I don't. Does that make sense for you, Jane?
Yeah, like, absolutely. Like, I don't know. Like, do you talk about religion? You can like cut this out. But like, I don't know. Do you consider yourselves like Catholic or Christian, or what would have been like your background? I suppose. Anthony,
Jesus,
growing up.
what a question.
Yeah, it's like growing up. It's like, yeah, Catholic.
Nearly there. Let's go.
I love that Darrow Brian quote where he's like, I'm an atheist. I'm a man of science. I do not believe in God. I reject the Bible. I reject the church, and I reject everything they stand for. But still, you know, Catholic.
Because I think it's like a cultural identity for.
I've softened so much on Christianity over the last couple of years. Like I was raised I would say very devout, but it was just standard back in those times, and then became an angsty, angry, atheistic teenager, and it's so much fun to read Richard Dawkins and shit all over your organised religion. And then I think I like you said, I acknowledge the social role religion plays, and now I'm like, I actually think there's a lot of good parts to Christianity that are very hard for us to access because there's so much shite as well. So yeah, I don't have a...
I suppose it's being able to like sift through, and I'm not going to get into like the horrible things because...
we all know, we are all aware of that. Yeah.
I suppose for me, again, it's like a cultural identity where I love the art of it because it's so... Catholicism is so rich with art objects, the style that I love, the flatness of it, the primal kind of like the use of amazing materials, because again, they were showing their piousness and the amazingness of God through the best of the best, which I love so much. But one thing that I find in my own... I don't know, is it like very, again, cringy to say, spiritual journey, that where I want to feel sometimes detached from the practice of Catholicism in the modern way because of the bad things, but I still feel like I could never say that God isn't real. I feel like that would be saying that I am a God. I couldn't, how could I know? That means that humans are better than nature and all this, to say that this is the answer. So for me, I actually see the divine in nature and the stillness of it, because you know the way they talk about that God is eternal, and what is eternal but stillness and nature. It's kind of where, you know, say if you've climbed Mullaghmore and you're on the top of that mountain, it feels so still that you're like, it's seeing the face of God. And I think that sometimes Irish, the way of teaching Catholicism is very literal, where God has a human face. And I could never think that, because again, that means that we are gods. But I think it's more so to see God in you. It's like when you ask for the strength of God, it's looking inward and asking to find that inner strength in yourself. So I think it's like an inner and outer journey. So when you like look back on doing Alive-O and stuff in school, it was like a different language. I still don't really understand it, so maybe I'm getting into very, very muddy waters here, but I definitely see God in nature, in animals and things. I've seen the cruel and the beauty, and I think that that's really, it can make life really special, because it means that the divine is outside the window right now. And how could you not think that was gorgeous, you know?
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's also that thing when people go, oh, if you believe in God, how could you believe in God because of the horror? And I'm like, I don't understand why you think that creation
it was
would
humans
only
that
be...
did that.
Well, that's one way of looking at it, but also us three try to create things, some with much more
success than others.
But it's just a bit of diplomacy in there. No, but I mean that as well. But it's like, we know. I think I heard. I'm so bad with all the names now. John Lloyd, who also did like Blackadder and stuff. I think he said that he had this take on it, which I really liked, where he's like, if you've ever created something, how could you think that ever you would get it exactly right? So if God is, so it's either is God omnipotent, is God a force? Like we look at it like it's some guy sitting down writing down, okay, this is the way it's going to be, and as if he then went and also give small children cancer. Yeah, so I don't think that's how creation works. No. You know, the grit gets into the wheels or something. I mean, obviously, I can't express it what it is, but it's. I do know that I don't like that simplistic view where it's like, oh, it all has to be good. It's like, have you ever tried to make something? It's never all good.
There's a really interesting topic in Chinese philosophy, and I hope I get it right, but it's this idea where if everything is good, like if life is happy, if there's no major issues, you don't need good people.
How could you ever recognize it was good?
Yeah, because it's like there's no problems to solve, right? So when things go a little bit wonky, then we need to bring in things like humaneness. You know, now this person is more humane, that person is helpful, they are humane, that person is evil, they are inhumane. And then when humaneness fails, then you need to bring in righteousness. And when righteousness fails, then you need to bring in rites and ritual to control people. And this whole idea that if you can get back to the source, the idea of good and evil and separation is irrelevant, because everything is just happening and people are just responding. But it's as soon as that starts to wobble a small bit. Then we have good and evil, and then we have people that prey upon those concepts as well.
And it's even what we were just saying about kind of proximal development and stuff. Like, you need the bit of darkness to make something interesting, to make something worthwhile. I really believe that. So in a way, it's inherent in the everything that there should be darkness as well. And then it creates sometimes the most beautiful things as well. Like, you've seen, the thing that always really gets me, I think I've said this a few times before, but like when people are hopeful against the face of just a tide of darkness, that's the most shining light of humanity and love and beauty. And you wouldn't see that light if it didn't sometimes get very dark.
I think it's one thing, it's almost self-soothing in our own experience. I know for me personally, the not being able to make anything material of what death is. So like for me, I definitely believe in heaven because it gives me comfort in knowing the people that I love that will pass on will go to a better place. But I could never believe in hell. I don't think hell exists because that just, I don't know. I don't want to believe it. So for me, heaven, maybe it isn't real. I don't know, but it's comfort for me to be able to carry on knowing that they're in a better place and I will meet them again. And I think that that's kind of a lot of what it is. It's being able to find comfort in that we can't live forever maybe, and making sense of something that you can never make sense of, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. And I think, well, for me, what I believe, I'm kind of in probably the same vein, but I believe hell is here. Like, not that it's all hell, but like it's when people see like terrible dictators. Was it Pol Pot who died in his bed or something? There was one of those terrible dictators, and they're like, well, look at him. There wasn't any karma because he died in his bed at 80 years old, even though he killed all those people. It's like, no, he was living in hell. A place where no one loved him, where he couldn't rely on anyone. I don't know who specifically I'm talking about, but we all get this archetype.
There's a few to choose from.
There's a few, and it's like, or Stalin or someone like that, that he could not even trust his own family. He started murdering his own family because his world was just hellish. Whereas there are kind, good people in difficult circumstances here, and they are not in hell. They contend with darkness bravely every day, but they also get shown kindness and love. I really believe that.
I think
I brought this to a grinding halt. I found your observations very
I mean, some people would have labelled it a satisfying emotional climax, Bart. But if you want to go with grinding halt, we can go with grinding halt.
That's my own projection. That's my own projection there. No, but I do think in Ireland there is some kind of rootedness. Yeah, would you call it animus? Kind of like there was more of a pagan belief system before, which is more of an animus kind of.
Yeah, I mean, really, animist is the new term. I would say pagan. And one of the things about paganism is that they didn't believe in an afterlife, so that they believed that this life is everything, and that's what led to such appreciation of nature, because they were like, oh, there's this is it. So we really need to take care of things. We really need to connect with the seasons and nature and animals.
And I like the fact that even though Ireland had so much trauma associated with religion in the last couple of 100 years, which is so dark, and still people have not completely let go. And I think it has something to do with that. The bedrock of where that modern Catholicism was built on is actually deeper. So even people who've been hurt by it desperately will still connect some way to spirituality in a way that, for instance, in the Netherlands, the soil is really, it's really thin, and it's gotten away from people. It's become very materialist. Even though I do believe it will come back as well, because people will find it. Even during COVID, you already saw, and there are some wonderful spiritual teachers there, but it's not held in the land in the same way. That's a thing here that I really love. I love, openness to the fairies and stuff like that. I love that kind of not knowing and kind of being respectful of the environment.
I think that there's like an amazing balance actually in rural Ireland between the pagans, like the Pishogues and the fairies, versus the Catholicism, which is just, I think, to be Irish is to have this stuff even in your blood without realizing it. It's like generationally, because like even you'd see still in modern homes, you know, the little holy water dishes. It's almost like a kind of a, what would even be the word? It's almost like an interior decoration. It's kind of ironic. It's kind of like turned on its head, where even my own sister will have the little, what do they call it? They put them out before the wedding. What do they call those? The little child of Prague, you know, the little like that. Yeah. The kind of, it's where it's ironic and it's endearing. It's like where it's like the bad art is so bad that it becomes good again. It's like turning it on its head, where we're kind of taking ownership of the trauma to now say that. I don't. Maybe I'm going into really obscure concepts, but it's taking ownership over it now. To the context is different. That it's a decoration. It's kind of bringing it back to having it as art again, rather than maybe associated with the bad things. So I like that in rural Ireland we have the nice mix of the thing we'd mentioned before of not cutting down like the bush. Where was it in Spanish Point or something? Because it's the fairy bush. So the council like went around it. Like I love
the motorway.
that.
Eddie Lennon
That's
was
amazing.
Involved in that, I was in myself and Katie went record shopping in Steamboat Records in Limerick last week, and I was leafing through one of the bins of records that hadn't been sorted yet. And I picked up a certain DJ, right? Kind of a 90s, 2000s DJ vinyl. And I was like, Katie, I can't remember. Do you like this guy ironically or unironically? And I was genuinely asking because like she was looking for like dancey tracks, you know. And when we went up to the counter with our whole, the guy behind the counter came to this and he was like, come here, if you like something ironically, you still like it. You know?
It's like where it's so bad that have you ever seen The Room? You know that one by
Tony Wiseau? I was thinking of that one.
It's just such a like it can't be bottled. It's such a good essence where it's amazing. Like I'll watch it over and over and I'll laugh. It's where nothing like that could ever be recreated with purpose. Like it's just so obscure that it's amazing. Yeah. If people don't know what that is, look it up because
you're in for.
It's like how does one even explain it?
Yeah. But you know things like putting out the Child of Prague, even if you're doing it like tongue in cheek or semi-ironically, you're still doing it. And I think there's not an acknowledgement there of actually the Catholics had it right and we better do this. It's just that maybe we don't know everything, and maybe there's a comfort in this.
Well, there's also something about, like, I heard this example given about someone not wanting to celebrate Christmas anymore. And then it was like, so because of the horrors of the church. And then it was like, so what do you do then? Nothing.
Yeah.
Is that better? Is it really better? I don't think so.
I remember Krishnamurti, the great iconoclastic teacher who would have debates with religious leaders and like reduce them to like just spitting piles of fury. You know, he used to really wind up these guys and he used to really tell people you must be a light to yourself, not the light of Jesus or the light of Buddha. You must find your own path. Even he said it's better to have misplaced tradition than to have nothing. Exactly. He's like, if you leave nothing there, we cannot abide a vacuum and something will enter, and it could well be something even worse. And I think it's definitely better to fill that with whatever is important to you, whether it is social causes or nature or so on, or even if it's like, okay, there's loads of problems with X practice, but I feel like it's kind of going in broadly the right direction, so I might follow it for a bit rather than saying, oh, they did A, B, and C, and I will hack that part of my, especially when it's your own heritage, like it is for us in Christianity, like cutting all of that off is, damaging. I'm not sure what I'm saying. I'm not trying to be an apologist for the church or anything like
that's
that.
Well, I think that's pretty clear. Well, here, I'll give you a controversial one.
Yay. Oh, thank God, Bart. I knew I could rely on you to dilute what I was saying.
The one that was a real problem in the Netherlands is that the biggest sort of joint cultural artifact is the feast of Saint Nicholas. So it's kind of like Santa Claus, but the kind of precursor to that. Anyway, he was a saint and he gave gifts to kids. So that I think Santa Claus, Saint Nicholas, I think that's all connected. But the issue is the tradition in the Netherlands would be he comes in on a steamboat in November, and then he has his black Pete's, his helpers, who are great crack, and they're kind of funny and they're dressed kind of in an old kind of Spanish garb. And he sails in from Spain. And he comes in, and then the kids put their shoes out for a couple of nights during those 3 weeks that he's there. And then on the 5th of December, his birthday, there's a big bag of presents and he writes poems to children as well. It's a really nice tradition. But the issue was white man coming in with a ship full of black people. And the black people mainly were white people with blackface on. So
where was the problem?
But there was a real funny thing that happened, because I think actually there wasn't any real issue with it from when I was growing up. So even like the black guys in my class or in my soccer team, they would all join in, and it was basically grand. Sometimes someone would call him Black Pete or something, but it was kind of like he's like a beloved character as well, you know. But then I think it was it the UN or it was some international body made a judgment about 12 years ago that they said it was racist, which is very interesting, because Dutch people were kind of like, it wasn't really an issue. And now, like, this might sound as a white guy saying, oh, it wasn't an issue, but I genuinely did speak, like, I remember kind of thinking about it when I was younger and talking to friends who were very Dutch but were black, you know, but they were really part of Dutch culture, because I think that's a part as well. It wasn't recent immigration. It's kind of immigration from way back when, so people have all integrated. And we were all a bit like, it's a bit weird that they're calling us racist. But then after a while, when you hear someone say, yeah, but it's the one white guy coming in on a ship with all the blacks, and we have a colonial history, and it's kind of like, oh yeah, there is something to it. But then obviously there would be a lot of activists who just tried to destroy the feast for the children. They would show up when the kids were there, and I'm like, I don't care what you think, that's evil. What they did in the end, which I think is very good, is they kind of amended the tradition. So now it's purely just soot, because they come in from the chimney to bring in the presents. And I'm like, beautiful.
Yeah.
That's lovely. But it was weird as well, because that was already always kind of part of the story, was that it was soot, but then they had like red lips and completely black. So it was a bit like, is it though really? Like there was something strange with that. And then but the interesting thing was, what I was kind of getting to, is that it was really examined by people. Like you always have the fringe people. So you would have people who are like, you can't take my culture away, which I think, like, and this is what we talked about in the conversation episode, like, you have to compassionately look at that. I was never like that, but I'm like, yeah, these people live in a country whose culture has really eroded, not by immigration or anything, but actually because we didn't look after it. I think because we were so mercantile with a lot of ways that we kind of let a lot of it go, and they're like, I'm holding on to this. So that impulse I understand. And then but it was too firm. You need to amend it, like with trad. You have to make sure it stays alive and it becomes modernized. But then you also had the people who tried to destroy it and were righteous.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the angry atheist kind of. And now in the end, what worked out is they were like, yeah, okay, we see your point, but we're keeping the tradition and we're just amending it, so now it's fine. And that seems to have gone off pretty well. Like the protests are lessening and lessening. And I think that integration of something, like you say, is much better than kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah, I suppose it's like acknowledging the bad, but then changing the context,
Exactly.
taking ownership over it.
Yeah, you're like, we're not throwing out the whole thing, but I see your point, and we'll take it with you. But I liked about what you were saying about the, what is it?
The Child of Prague.
Child of Prague. Yeah, because I know the image, but I don't know the name of it.
Yes, even me, I'm like, what?
but it's funny because even when it becomes like interior decorating, that's nearly like a placeholder, so that later it can come back into its meaning.
Yes, it's kind of like a paradox almost. It's where in the original you weren't meant to worship these little objects and things. So then you're taking ownership where I am going to worship it now. So it's taking ownership over it to kind of maybe make peace with yourself. If that makes sense. A lot of the time we'll probably listen back over this. I'll be like, I'll have to ring you later. I'm like, I'm sorry I said that.
Yeah. No, you've been brilliant.
You've been amazing.
Jane. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing
Their
your secrets with us, for opening your heart.
This has been the Weshtern Philosophy Podcast and our rambling exploration of failure. Follow us on all the socials at Weshtern Philosophy Pod. If you want to support the podcast, you can buy us a coffee via a link in the episode description below. We will be back next week. with the explosive finale of Season 1 of the Weshtern Philosophy Podcast. Shlán.